Hi, this is Greg Remke, and each year I do workshops on the economics of high school and homeschool debate topics. This year, one of the debate topics for a homeschool debate league is on reforming legal immigration. So I have a series of presentations that looks at the economics and history of immigration policy and of proposed immigration reforms. So this is the first of these. The League, the Christian Communicators Northwest, their resolution is on legal immigration reform. Resolve the U.S. federal government should substantially reform the qualitative and or quantitative requirements for legal immigration in the United States. Specifically, who may legally immigrate, what numbers of people may legally immigrate, and under what conditions. So this is an effort to get students to grapple with our current immigration policy, which is fairly convoluted and all over the place, but to not have them have to debate illegal immigration and whether illegal immigrants should be shipped back or given amnesty or the other, sort of very controversial debates over illegal immigrants in the U.S. This is a resolution to focus on just making immigration policy work. So it's an interesting topic. It's narrower than and maybe less controversial than if it were to try to deal with illegal immigration and solve that problem as well as others. So again, the resolution for the 2015-16 season, I've done one workshop on that topic. So for students who've attended that, you register for this and you should be able to get this at no charge. Other students that are interested, I'm sure it's a bargain. So, making the case for immigration reform. You can do moral and ethical claims. You could argue that people have a freedom, should have a freedom to move, their natural liberty to control their life and their property. What would restrict them from moving from one place to another? Just as we would argue people who are born and raised in Oregon could move to California or New York or Florida, why not someone from another country being able to move to our country, or someone here who would like to live in France or would like to live in Australia? What moral argument or ethical arguments are there against people moving to other places? So there's a long history and discussion of this. And, Thomas Jefferson, I think, said, why should we be restricted to the place we happen to be born into? On the other hand, you don't have the moral right to do things that hurt other people. So if an American moving to Mexico somehow hurt people in Mexico or caused economic damage for them or political damage, countries certainly have a right to make policies that protect their populations. So this moral and ethical is one level of looking at arguments for and against immigration policies and reforms. Also, I would encourage students to look at American history, the American history on immigration policy. First, of course, we called for independence partly because the King of England, the claim that the king was restricting immigration to the U.S. And in the early years, we wanted more immigrants to develop the country. There are constitutional claims on what immigration policy is or should be in the Constitution. And of course, there's a whole history of legal regulations and legal cases involving immigration. But students should be familiar with the history of U.S. immigration, which originally was very open, then became restrictive for a time with the Chinese exclusionary laws and later the Immigration Act of 1924, and then was reformed again beginning in 1964 and expanded later, partly as part of the civil rights movement, as advocates for racially neutral policies focused on the racial history of immigration restrictions in the U.S. And now we've got larger immigration, and proponents call for more immigration, higher numbers, and critics call for less. Then you have cultural claims and concerns. So even people who say, well, sure, maybe the economics works, but you're culturally changing the country. You're bringing large numbers of people who change the character of society. Certainly in my small town in Burien, Washington, near the SeaTac airport, when I was a kid, it was 90%, 95% Anglo. Now it's much more Hispanic immigrants here. There's lots of people from India, from Africa, from all over the world that live here, partly because it's a lower income area south of Seattle. and real estate and rental prices are less here than they are in Bellevue or North Seattle. But this is all over the country. Immigrants have come in large numbers and made things look different for older Americans, certainly, than they did in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. So, is that a good thing? Well, if you like diversity, it is. If you don't like diversity, it's not. Or maybe there's other concerns, concerns of people's religions, concern of who they vote for. So there's legitimate concerns here that should be addressed on cultural issues as well as economic and moral issues. And of course, my strength is in economics and economic history, and most of my discussion will be on economic arguments, claims, analysis about the costs and the benefits of immigration, whether more immigration, current or less. This quote, "It's the economy, stupid," is said to be James Carville, who was campaign advisor for Bill Clinton, that he should focus on the state of the economy because that's what most people care about. So maybe the same in immigration, though maybe the moral and ethical issues are the most important. The average person and the average judge in a debate round may be more interested in the economic effects of immigration. They don't want to suffer because of new immigrants. If that's the case, they want to know those issues. So again, the resolution that this group is debating looks at qualitative and quantitative requirements. We have qualitative in the sense of we have H-1B visas for people with college degrees or advanced degrees that are needed or wanted in particular places in the economy. And then we have quantitative restrictions on the number of people who can come into the country each year. And we have a certain carve out for refugees and for close family members. So we make decisions given the limited number of immigrants on who can come and for what reasons. So you could argue for reforming this legal immigration to increase or decrease the number of people who can come, or you could call for changes in the qualitative restrictions about the number of college graduates, high-level immigrants for business purposes, or for people who invest in the country and thereby get a green card or a citizenship. Or you could say we shouldn't have, this special thing for close family relatives because it doesn't help the economy. There's lots of arguments you can make on different sides of this. Students, of course, researching this should look at current immigration policy. The Immigration and Naturalization Act is the body of law covering it. You can look at the American Immigration Council and other sources for the current law. They say the annual worldwide limit of permanent immigrants to the U.S., 675,000 a year. When you count illegal immigrants who come in, of course, it's more, but this debate topic's focused on legal immigrants. So also Congress and the President look at the numbers on refugee policy. This is the debate now as the President calls for 10,000 Syrian refugees to come to the U.S. next year. Congress and the President are able to determine that in various ways. Again, legal immigration based on reunification, trying to put families back together. So when a refugee comes here later, his family can come, and admitting immigrants with skills that the U.S. economy wants, that is particular companies advocating for H-1B visas, and also for promoting diversity. This is the green card lottery, or the lottery that allows people to come in. It's, again, part of the racial origins of immigration policy, first to restrict Asians into the country, Chinese and later Japanese, and to restrict in 1924 mainly the Eastern Europeans and Southern Europeans, which were a new immigrant population, that there was a lot of anti-immigrant backlash against them by the Know Nothings and the Harvard Anti-Immigration League and things like that. So people recognizing that racial side, now promoting more diversity, so more Asians. After 64, the uptick in immigration came from Southeast Asia after the Vietnam War and others, compared to Northern Europeans coming in, which were the earlier immigration cohort. So again, more on this history. This is an article from the Wall Street Journal, Visa Demand for High-Skilled Foreigners, Prompting Lottery. This is April 2015. Each year, some 85,000 people can come in on these H-1B visas, these are set aside, or these are people who U.S. companies are calling for, and these usually are quotas filled within a few days. So there's demand for a few 100,000 more that aren't allowed to come. Critics say that these and more drive down wages in the computer and tech industry because they are able to take these jobs at lower wages. Advocates say U.S. companies need these workers, want these workers, and Google, Apple, and others, they can expand overseas. If they can't get the key people they want here, they can just expand their operations in Europe, India, Asia, or elsewhere. So limiting the key people that companies say they need might push company operations overseas, even though critics of these policies argue that they're suppressing wages here. We have a global economy. You can invest anywhere, trade anywhere. Our main restrictions in the world today are restrictions on people moving across borders, and that has the consequence, unintended consequence, of driving industry to go to the places that they can hire the workers they want to do, whether it's in the textile industry or the tech industry or any other. Okay, so again, you can read about that. This is a note on the green card. This is the diversity immigration visa program where 50,000 immigrant visas are available each year. It's sort of a random program. Another program, we have Congress passed EB5 that allows foreign investors. This is the idea that wealthy foreign business people might invest money and start a company here. And if we keep them out just because they can't legally immigrate, we're hurting the U.S. economy. So let wealthy people come to invest, start companies that'll create jobs for Americans. As usual with these programs, they don't work as expected. This one mainly translates into real estate investment. So, a company, an investor is not likely to come with millions of dollars to try and start a company in the U.S. on the basis of an immigration policy that could change at any time. Instead, what they do is invest in real estate. So brokers here line up foreign investors with $1 million or $500,000 to invest, and they get them to sign on as investors for a new office building or apartment complex, and then they get their permanent residence from that. And you can show in building the building they're at least getting 10 permanent residents. So this is an article about somebody there's problems with this, of course. Somebody in Seattle was recently arrested claiming they had taken advantage of this. But again, this is the part of the ongoing debate. When you limit the numbers and try and get just the best people, you get all sorts of policies that don't work the way Congress intended. So I have more information on immigration policy reform on the website economicthinking.org/immigration. We have a whole range of articles. Now, as you can see, policy for 2007-8, that was the NCFCA debate topic on immigration reform. And that was focused on the federal government changing its policy on illegal immigration. But I have many links and notes from different people writing on immigration policy, different books and articles. Some have been updated since then for other debate topics on immigration. But this is a resource. You'll find some broken links and things like this here, but there's a lot of places you can go to quickly see articles that might be of interest on immigration reform. Here's an article from just a couple days ago on the Pew Research Center that researches public policy issues, particularly Hispanic issues. And now we find that as of November, we've got more people leaving the country than coming. So some net loss of 140,000 from 2009 to 2014. So over the last 5 years, more Mexicans have left the U.S. going back to Mexico than Mexicans that have come here from Mexico. That's pooling legal and illegal together. And why is that? Well, we had the huge financial crash 2007 and 8, or 2008 and 9. So demand for labor, particularly in construction, dropped dramatically in the U.S. And during that housing and financial downturn, people started going back, and the U.S. still hasn't recovered. We've got some recovery in industry, but we still haven't had the kind of recovery we've had after previous recessions. And so again, for people who see Mexican immigration as this huge and unstoppable problem, well, again, we've got more people leaving than coming over the last 5 years. We had a debate topic in the public school world on economic engagement with Cuba, Mexico, Venezuela. And particularly with Cuba and Mexico, the key economic issues have to do with immigration. Illegal immigrants coming from Mexico, and in Cuba's case, we have the strange wet foot, dry foot policy where if a Cuban can get on the U.S. soil, they can stay legally. But if we catch them, if our border guards catch them while they're, in the boat or on the beach before they get to dry land, they can be deported back to Mexico. It's an unfortunate policy. I'll talk more on that on Cuba. And again, for Mexico, we've had the problem of not allowing legal immigration or not allowing enough for the people that want to come. And so that's caused all sorts of unintended consequences. I recommend a number of books here. You can see from the title and look them up on Amazon. Most of them have a look inside where you can see more of the story. And each of these discusses aspects of immigration and international trade and investment that's relevant for the topic. The entire study guide can be downloaded at the URL above, and you can just search, for Mexico at Economic Thinking. This should come up. It's an 8-page study guide, and really the one of the most interesting articles, I think, is on the first page, where I draw from a Wall Street Journal article that looks at the recent history of immigration from Mexico. Now, this mixes legal and illegal immigration, but here's a couple key things. So from 1980 to 2007, 10 million people migrated from Mexico to the U.S., legally and illegally. That's a huge number of people. So today, some 12 million Mexican-born people in the U.S., and with their offspring, they're about 10% of the entire nation's population. Which is, why the Republican Party is trying to reframe its policies to not seem anti-Mexican when it tries to deal with illegal immigration. Police chasing illegal immigrants often pick people who are legal immigrants, and that's a concern. And most of the illegal immigrants are here with their husband, wife, or children who are here legally. So you've got a big mess. But this topic is really not dealing with illegal immigration, just legal. Now, the interesting part of this article that was in the Wall Street Journal, A Nation Built for Immigrants, this is September 21, 22, and I'm sorry I don't have the year on that. It's in the last couple of years, but you can search by topic or by the title of the article. Way larger than we had in 1970 or in 1980. 1 million Mexican-born people in the U.S. in 1970, 2 million in 1980. When President Reagan was governor of California, it was 90% Anglo. So what we've had is we had very restrictive immigration policies, 1924 to 64. So most of the country was, we didn't have a lot of immigrants. For the old folks who grew up, they grew up with mostly very few immigrants. This surge of immigration, the return to a traditional or older open immigration or more open immigration policy has allowed far more people to come here legally, and people came illegally. So this one generation basically reshaped much of the U.S. through the Mexican migration. And in the article, he focuses on demographics. He explains in the article, this is from a couple years ago, that it's going to stop because it was demographically based. The baby boom that hit the U.S. in the 50s, that surged our population through the 50s, 60s, 70s, which is the large cohort of children born after World War II when people came home from the war, that same baby boom came later to Mexico, and what the driving force of this surge of Mexican immigration was one, the Reagan Republican Democrat policies that lowered taxes significantly, deregulated the economy. That led to the U.S. having a booming economy from the early 80s to 2005. That surging U.S. economy and the housing industry drew millions from Mexico to work here. At the same time, the Mexican government had terrible policies, socialist policies. They nationalized the banks. They heavily regulated the economy. There was corruption, destruction from the war on drugs. So as the Mexican economy struggled and the U.S. economy boomed, that drew lots of Mexicans into the U.S. Now, it's important to recognize that the surging U.S. economy was in part created by the Mexicans who came here and people from other countries. Immigrants come, they work hard, the The economics of this, I'll reference studies further on, but that surging immigration was both a cause and a consequence of the booming economy. All those people who came needed places to live. That boosted the housing market. They bought food, they bought clothing. That boosted those markets. So the booming economy is the core of it, and also, again, the demographics. Mexico in the 80s and 90s had huge numbers of people in their teens and 20s, and those are the people who move. Those are the people who are, more comfortable leaving home and going and taking, pursuing what they see as opportunity elsewhere. That demographics has changed. Mexicans now have smaller families, not nearly as many people coming into the teens and 20s, so we're going to have a drop-off. We've had a drop-off in part because of the demographics in Mexico.